Hi everyone, welcome to the Movie Section Show. My name is Fariba, and today let's talk about Scream 6, which is a new horror film that is now out in theaters and another entry to the Scream franchise. So I had a chance to see it, and overall, I was pretty impressed with Scream 6. There were things that it really does that it kind of upscales everything from anything that we've seen in the Scream franchise. So let me first talk about the characters because I think that when we are thinking about Scream, like at least with Scream 6, we do not have all the original characters, right? I think that, with this one, we do not have Sidney Prescott because Neve Campbell did not come back to reprise her role because of some of the things that happened behind the scenes regarding, pay disputes. And then, of course, we know from the last film, Dewey had died. And so the only character that is still there is Gail. And yet, can these new set of survivors carry on the franchise without the original characters? And I think overall they do such a great job of doing that. They really are able to establish that these new characters can carry on this series. So for the one thing that, one of the things that we do get out of this is that the four survivors that we get, Tara, Sam, Mindy, and Chad, they become the core four. And I think that when they do establish themselves as the new survivors, you kind of get the sense of, okay, I want to root for them because they do have their own personalities in a way that you do enjoy each of them for who they are, especially because each of them are very different, and yet they all share a common thing, and that is that they're all survivors. And the more and more you get deep into their relationship as a core four, the more that you're rooting for them. And I think that that really plays a lot into, okay, like setting up this intensity of like, okay, can they all survive? Like you're having this anticipation of that. And I think that once they establish these characters, you really start to really root for them. And I think that you start to connect them, you start to empathize them, you start to really hope that somehow they can make it, right? And of course, you really have to take into consideration the things like the tropes, the meta stuff. I mean, that's a big part of what this franchise is. They play on the references for a reason. And I think that when you do have that in mind, it kind of enhances sort of that, that fear that you have, like the trepidations, like, okay, what's going to happen with these characters? Because the fact that they're really kind of close to one another, the last thing you want to do is like lose anyone, right? And I think that they do such a great job of setting up that dynamic. And I think that because the dynamic is so strong, that I think in a sense, not only are the characters great, not only are you hoping that these characters are able to survive, but also it sets up its own identity that, it can in a sense emulate what we see with Sydney, Gail, and Dewey, but doing so in a way that we have this whole new dynamic. And I think in that case, it proves that even with these new characters, they can be these are the new characters that can carry on the series, and establish its own identity as a new phase for Scream. And I think that's the one thing that it really, really kind of takes advantage of, is that I think it really favors in terms of this new film is that these characters can be good characters, that have really good arcs, that have really good development, the role that they play. And I think that because of that, it does such a really fine job of setting them up that, again, the characters actually work in this film. Like you don't hate them, and also just kind of like, okay, now that we know them and what the dynamic is, you kind of have this sense that, okay, I'm now resonating with them. And so I think because of this whole character development, I think that plays in favor of this film. And then, so that's just one aspect I liked about it. Another thing, of course, is Ghostface. I think when we got into this film, like a lot of it is, okay, well, what is sort of the threat level that is Ghostface? How does it compare to some of the other ones that we've seen before? And, will the reveal be as great as it can be, right? Like, is it going to shock us? And I will say this, like, because this is a film that plays on the tropes, that plays on the meta stuff, that, I think one of the things I do have to appreciate, at least with this film, is that a lot of what they do take from, an actual real life, like the stuff that they thought about, like, the Sam theories, they kind of play on that and actually imitate, a lot of what's happening on the internet verse and put it and integrate it into this film and play on that. And I think that that was a really smart thing that they played on. I think because of all those aspects, it makes this film far more fun. It even leads up to some pretty funny moments that I did not expect, especially for like, a horror film where a lot of people are dying. Because of those meta stuff, that it works in the film's favor. establishing a little bit of a different tone, but also being still balanced out with like the fact that this is a horror film. And not just that, but also allowing us to really kind of set up the anticipation of Ghostface. Because like they are playing on a lot of the things that we do know from like real life, playing on the theories and all that sort of stuff. Like I think it really kind of gets us guessing who Ghostface is more and more into this film. One of the things I really appreciate coming from Mindy's character is that because she's very knowledgeable about the horror genre and just like, you know, how legacies, you know, films work and how franchises work, like you take that into consideration and you're kind of being very attentive of like, okay, I gotta think about what these characters are, what their roles are, what they've been doing so far, and you're like, okay, I need to think 2 steps ahead of all of them. And I think that that really plays a, you know, a part in making this film far more fun as a, like an investigative standpoint, because you're like, okay, I need to figure out who the Ghostface is and can it be as predictable as it is. And I mean, I will say for one thing, like when it comes to like Ghostface's reveal, like yes, there's some aspects of it that was pretty predictable, but also like there is some deception upon it that you're like, okay, there is some, you know, creativity to it. Some things were pretty smart. I think some of the decisions that they do take in terms of who Ghostface is pretty smart, because a lot of it is played upon deception. And I think that when we get to the reveal by the end of the film, you're like, aha, that makes far more sense. I will say for one thing, like it does get a bit predictable in some things here and there, because like again, trying to determine who Ghostface is, I think that the more and more you're kind of thinking about how, you know, how like I mean, for me, for someone who loves watching murder mysteries, I was using a lot of that as, you know, trying to understand and figure out who Ghostface is. And once you use sort of those skills, some things start to be a bit predictable in a sense. Like, okay, well, of course, like this character may be too obvious to be Ghostface, or that this character might be, you know, they don't fit the profile as a Ghostface or a killer in a sense, right? And I think that because of that, there are some parts of the film where it does get a bit too predictable, but even then it's still fun. It is super fun. It has some really fun moments. There are some pretty humorous moments that I did not expect, that I think again it plays upon just like how this film works itself in general, like what it relies on, like some of the more things that makes it a classic Scream film that they integrate into this one and continue that off, but also trying to be far more upscale. And speaking of upscale, like this film really takes things to a whole new level. The deaths are very gory. They're far more bloodier. They're far more violent than I ever thought. And I think that a lot of it is because of its new location. Like they really take the New York location to a whole new level. They take it. They take advantage of the location. I think that that really helps this film trying to be its own thing and trying to kind of up the scales of what it can establish itself as a slasher film. And it's pretty effective because the deaths are far more violent. I mean, it really shocks you just how, you know, how creative the kills are this time around. And I think that that's something that I was like, wow, they really kind of took things to a whole different level in this film that, you know, you really have to appreciate. I think that because of all these aspects, Scream 6 seems like to be a film that really takes things to a whole different level and doing so in a way that they succeed in trying to be, you know, trying to take things that are classic Scream elements, but also trying to be far more bigger film and, you know, being its own thing, kind of form its own identity for it. And I think for one thing, again, like one thing that I need to mention is that, yeah, there is no Sidney Prescott in this film, who is literally the face of Scream. Like, you can't have a Scream film without Sidney. Yet this is a film where we do have a Scream film without Sidney. And I think even that, like, they do such a really great job of just addressing Sidney Prescott and doing some way that's really respectable. I think that's something that I was like, I really liked, because again, like there's so many different ways that you can address a big character who, you know, is a face of like a franchise, and somehow when they do not return, it's like, how will they address it? And I know with Creed 3 they didn't really address Rocky, but in this one they really did such a great job of addressing where she is, what's happening, and doing so in a way that's really respectful. So I really like that. And for one thing, again, like this is a film that really takes things to a whole new level. It can be its own film. And I think that having seen these characters, having seen how they established Ghostface, how they've established the connections that these characters have, and doing so in a way that, you know, it really kind of takes things to a whole new level, that I think that in this case, this whole new phase of Scream that we have with these four with these four characters that we have, I think that it can be its own thing. I think it really succeeded in establishing its own identity and not having to rely on the, you know, original characters. Although we do have Kirby in this film, which I'll mention in a second, but I think that with that being the case, we get the charm of these new characters. And I think that they are very effective for really setting up this whole new phase that we have. I think the dynamic between the core four, it's a big thing. I think that this time around with Chad and Mindy, they do have far more bigger roles this time around. And because they are, you know, they do share a common, you know, thing, and that is that, you know, they all are survivors, that you really understand what they're feeling, what they're going through. You really resonate with them, and you're kind of just like cheering for them. And I think that really does a really great job of establishing, like, okay, how does the audience feel with these characters that we have in front of us, and how can they react to it. And I think for me, as someone who was spectating this, I really was rooting for them. I think that really played a big part of my enjoyment into this film, as well as, you know, trying to figure out who Ghostface is. I think that that was a really fun thing overall. Like, this was a really fun film that, again, raises the stakes in the deaths, really makes things fun. Again, has some really fun, humorous moments. And again, really upscales everything that's happened in comparison to any Scream film that we've seen before. Now, of course, this is not the most perfect film. For one thing, it does have some predictable moments. And I think for one thing, again, when we do try to figure out who Ghostface is, it does get a bit too predictable, but also you're like, okay, they do play around kind of our expectations a little bit, which I think I will say is a really smart thing that they do. I think it's a really pretty brilliant move overall. And when we do get to kind of some of the bigger upscale things like the shrine and everything like that, we're kind of just like, okay, who is this mastermind and all that sort of stuff. And I think that when you do get to the final act of the film, with everything that we do get in the beginning, right? I think that the beginning stuff, like everything we get from the first and second act are great. I think they really establish the exposition, the pacing's well done. They really kind of set, you know, the scariest parts of the movies, like, of course, like, you know, when the killer's on the run, when Ghostface is on the run. I think each of those moments work really well, and doing so in a way that everything is paced very well. I think the pacing of it's really good. I think that this is a film that really balances out its, you know, its tone, its pacing. That's something I really have to credit for, because sometimes you can have a film where the pacing's totally off and it just kind of ruins the enjoyment factor of even just like any slasher film. And I think this one does a really great job of really balancing it out overall and knowing when to kind of take a pause out of everything, and then, you know, having the, you know, the slasher moments kind of pick up again. And it does really well in this film as well. Now, again, when I get to the final act, I think the final act is where things sort of kind of dim down a little bit. It's particularly the logic stuff, because when you do get to Ghostface reveal, I will say for one thing that the logic of some things doesn't really make any sense. Like, when you get more and more into the explanation, you're kind of like, okay, maybe it sounds a bit ridiculous. So there are some ridiculousness in terms of what happens more so in the final act. But even with that being the case, like, I think overall it's still a really good film. For one thing, like Kirby, I mean, it's really great to see Kirby back. I mean, there's a reason why she was a fan favorite character in Scream 4. It's really great to see Hayden back as Kirby. I think she was a really nice added addition to this film to kind of carry off some things. Again, being a part of the deception, being a part of, like, okay, well, can she be the killer? Can she not be the killer? A lot of that is being played upon in this film. And not just that, but again, having another horror, you know, kind of soar in this film, just, you know, understanding how the things work and being also very much connected to Woodsboro, it definitely makes it a far more personal film as you get more and more into it. And I think I will say for this, like, this is a very personal film when you get to, you know, learning the characters, who Ghostface is. Like, I think those things really play a big factor into it. Again, when we do get to see more of Sam Carpenter in this film, like, you can really sense, like, sort of the psyche that she's dealing with, the conflictions she's still having from the last film that continues on with this film as well. And I think that the more you're following Sam, like, the more you understand, like, why she is, you know, the final girl alongside Tara. Like, I think that these are characters that can really, really carry on with this franchise for a reason. I think when we see Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera, they really do such an amazing job of really kind of showing off these characters, showing off the personalities of them, getting us to really care for them, especially the sisterly dynamic that we see in this film. I think that really plays a big part of why this film really works. And because of that, like, I think that with all these aspects, it really kind of allows us to, like, at least for me, allowed me to really enjoy a lot of the things that we're getting out of this film, especially like trying to understand who Ghostface is, what his motives could be, setting up the upscale of all things, making the scenes, making some of the scenes far more shocking, and yet in some cases kind of fun. And not just that, but also making a far more funnier film than I would have imagined, because again, there are some pretty humorous moments that I did not expect. But yeah, I think overall, I think with Scream 6, it's a really good film. I was really surprised about it. I think so far, like this year, we've had some really good horror films, and it's only March right now. And I think that we've had some really quality horror films so far. I mean, it just speaks for how the horror genre is in general. Like, it's really just kind of upping it up each and every time. And Scream 6 is a testament of that as well. And I think that with this film, aside from some of the more predictable moments and some ridiculous, plot elements that do happen here and there, I think overall it's a really fun film with some really nice characters. The dynamics are pretty great. It's really nice seeing Kirby back, in this film. Like, she's pretty effective. And overall, again, I really enjoyed with what we get out of this film, like the final product of it. And so, yeah, that's all I have to say about Scream 6 right there. Again, I really enjoyed it. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are. Have you seen Scream 6? If so, what are your thoughts overall? What do you think of this film? Do you think that this film can, after having seen Scream 6, do you think it's established itself as its own new phase for the Scream franchise? Like, do you think that these characters can carry it on having seen it? Maybe, maybe not. If not, why do you think that we still need characters like Dewey, Gale, and Sidney back in, something like, another sequel, although Dewey's probably kind of impossible to bring back. But even then, like, do we still need a character like Sidney Prescott to still be the front and center of this new franchise? Or has the last two films really established that a new set of characters can carry on Scream's legacy? What do you think overall with the Ghostface reveal, without spoiling anything? Like, did you expect it? Did you not expect it? Was it too predictable? What do you think about overall about the film itself in general? Like, did you like the characters? What do you think about the violence, the upscale violence that we do get this time around? Like, do you think that was a good choice? Was it not a bad choice? What do you think about the location itself? Like, do you think that it worked in their favor? Did it not? Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.